Why are financial service companies allowed to charge higher fees and profit more off of the retirement savings of teachers than they do on the retirement savings of politicians and bureaucrats? I asked this body who would trade their high quality 457B for an educator's 403B plan. We like to talk about how we value our educators. The 403B industry values them in a whole other way. How much money they can extract from them. We can do better and must do better for educators. I urge and I vote. These are the words of our guest today, Illinois State Senator Karina Villa, a former educator who was sold an unsuitable, high cost annuity product and who recently introduced a 403B reform bill that would have ended front end and back end loads. It would have capped advisor fees at 0.5%, capped admin fees at 0.5%, and it would have required vendors to offer low cost index funds and low cost target date funds. Of course, the industry hated it. And of course, they flooded the zone with money, lobbyists, distortions, and frankly, outright lies. Welcome, Senator Villa.
Hey, Dan, I'm so excited to be here with you. And it's as I'm listening to you give those opening remarks, as you know, those were my prepared remarks for the floor, if this bill ever made it to the floor. And up until the last minute of session, I was fighting the good fight, trying to get this bill to the finish line. But the powers that be were stronger than this little lonely voice here. And even though we got the bill out of committee, even though we had so much support for it, I was unable to get it to the finish line. But those closing remarks were supposed to be my closing remarks on the floor. But don't worry, I'm going to keep on fighting. And during veto session, I plan to use those remarks in my closing.
Scott and I love you for so many reasons. And I like to fancy myself somewhat as a writer. And when Scott sent me a text of those words, Scott, what did I text back? What was the emoji? And if you don't remember, I can tell you.
Was it the fire emoji?
3 fires right there. And I have jokingly dubbed you Tank Woman, a reference to Tiananmen Square, where that lone solitary man stood up to the 3 tanks. And I even made a graphic of an image of you standing up to 3 tanks labeled, high cost industry, ignorance, and NTSA, one of the lobbying groups, one of the many lobbying groups who fought against this. Are you
Yeah.
looking, Scott, at what I said?
Scott and Dan, working with the two of you has just been so unbelievable. Those early morning phone calls, those last minute text messages, you all literally talking me through tears of emotion and frustration, because I know what this means for teachers. And quite frankly, I have always been scared of math. That's just a thing. I have been afraid of math, so I ran away from anything that had to do with math when I wanted to, decide what my profession was going to be. So I became a social worker, right? And as a school social worker, I remember early on, my dad was constantly asking me about my investments. And my dad is a genius when it comes to math. So he would constantly ask me, he's a businessman, and he would constantly ask me, are you investing? Are you investing? Are you investing? So finally, I did sit down and meet with that person in the teacher's lounge who was sitting there and who had come recommended by, listen to this, one of my former middle school teachers. I was working in the middle school at the time. My former middle school teacher was still there. And he was like, you need to save for retirement. So finally, I sat down with this person and I started to invest. Little did I know that years later, I was going to have a pivot of my career. I was going to leave the school social work profession in order to run for office for reasons other than this, okay? for reasons that included social impact on my families and students that I was working with. That was why I ran for office, not because I ever thought I was going to pass a 403B or attempt to pass a 403B bill. And then lo and behold, when I went out and started knocking on doors, people were constantly talking about pensions, 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 pensions. And so I decided that when I won my election, my first election, which was for the House of Representatives, I was going to request to sit on the pensions committee. That's where it all started. When I sat on that pensions committee and started learning and started getting curious, and the amazing staff in the House, because I was a House member before I became a senator, started to sit and walk through things with me, and I would ask questions and they would answer them, and they would give me reading materials after reading materials. And then I came over to the Senate and I did the same thing. After I won that election, I was like, I want to sit on the pensions committee. And that's where I said, okay, what about this plan? And I literally brought my paperwork from my 403B plan to one of the staff members. I said, help break it down. I need examples. Again, I hate math. I'm like, I need examples. I need you to highlight here how what I've been learning, how it applies to this plan. And holy cow, I was blown away. And here we are.
Oh, what an origin story, 403B origin story. And I can only imagine that when you signed up, you left that meeting thinking, wow, I'm doing something for my future. I'm starting to be an investor. You probably felt initially really good about this.
Dan, I felt like I had made it into like a certain group, a certain elite group of people who are investors, who are intelligent with their money. Something that again, I had always feared. I had always feared having financial conversations. I was a single woman who, was early on in my career and really shied away from any kind of conversations that had to do with finances. And it was my father over and over repetitively saying, what are you doing to invest for retirement? That finally moved the mark for me. And Dan, I haven't told you or Scott this, but let me tell you now, I have had conversation after conversation with my dad about this bill. And he's like, this
Love
is
this.
unbelievable. This is like, are you kidding me? Like, this is terrible. Like, I did not know that that was the thing. Like, I would think that you were being advised by highly educated professionals who really were watching out for your best interest. He's like, I can't believe that this is what's going on. And I remember, so after I came home, we had been working long days, like almost 20-hour days, and came home on Memorial Day. My parents were having a cookout, so I like dragged myself over to their house to hang out with the family. And my dad immediately, when he saw me, he's like, did you get the bill done? And I'm like, no, Dad, I didn't. And he was like, you'll get it done. But yeah, it's like full circle. That was, I don't know, 20 years ago. I don't want to age myself here. So
Wow. Oh my God. I love your dad so much. I hope we get a chance to meet him maybe on a Zoom call or something. And I love this idea that he has been looking out for you. And his shock is what everyone experiences when they find out about the K-12 403B. It is this black hole. And Scott and I, every time we would interact with you, we would say, oh my God, is she amazing? She is probably the most impressive 403B advocate we have met because what you faced, we sat in on these Zoom calls, Senator. We saw what these mostly men were saying, the the outright BS. Scott's going to get into the details of the fabrications that came out of their mouths. And I will be very upfront. I lost my cool on one of these Zoom calls. And I'm going to tell you why it was. You would recommend, let's all introduce ourselves, who we're representing. And of course, I say, Dan Otter, Executive Director of 403BYs. We're a nonprofit. We advocate for better plans. When I'm not going to say the financial company as much as I want to, but I will just say it is a red rated vendor, one of our worst of the worst. when this person, this early 60-year-old male, said, "We represent the teachers," I wanted to jump through the Zoom screen. The balls on these guys to say that. And I got to say, I got satisfaction out of challenging them because I doubt they ever hear pushback. I think mostly they have these kind of conversations in lounges where people think, as you did, that you were doing the right thing. So, anyway, I want to apologize. Scott's texting me, Dan, back down. Oh, it felt cathartic though. And then the next call, I just was on mute the whole time practically.
Yeah, I remember Scott and I and you had to have a pre-call before the next call to talk about like let's level it down. But what's hilarious is that the next call I remember I accidentally decided to have we have an amazing staff member who makes this delicious Puerto Rican coffee, okay? And so I drank this coffee and I was like boom. So then it was like I had a conversation with you all to please do like some Zen meditation yoga before the call. I decided to do the opposite of that. So then the next call, I was on fire. So I'm like, okay, we really need to like all do yoga and meditation before these calls.
It's infuriating. My son has been sending me all these links to Stoicism and like these philosophers and how to Zen out. And I try, like when I'm having my coffee in the morning or when I am actually doing yoga, which I do about 3 days a week, I am the most chill person. But when these people are ripping off teachers, all my calmness goes out the window because it is so infuriating. Oh my gosh. Well, I want to ask you, and we're going to get into the bill, and Scott's got some, detailed questions, but what led you to make the jump from education to politics?
So in Illinois, we had a governor um, who his name is Bruce Rauner, and he was there for I think just one term, and he was a Republican governor in a majority Democrat state. What ended up happening was that he refused to pass a budget. As a result of the failure to pass a budget, I, as a school social worker, was seeing the impact firsthand on the families I was working with. Because I used to be able to find social service agencies for families who were going through any kinds of problems, whether it was domestic violence, whether it was food insecurity, whether it was housing insecurity. I was always able, and at that time, I was working and living in DuPage County, which is one of the wealthiest counties in the country. And so I remember feeling like if we in DuPage County are struggling, if I'm unable to find resources for the families in DuPage County, what are other people going through? So I just remember the struggle day in and day out, day in and day out with these families. And I felt like my hands were tied. And as you and Scott have probably realized at this point, when I go to advocate on behalf of others, I'm relentless. Like I don't stop. And that's how I was as a school social worker. Like if I needed something for a family, I was relentless and I would go to the ends of the earth to try to find resources. But then it became basically like every one of my cases, I had to fight that hard. And so I got to a point where I was like, this is not working. I need to figure out a different way. And I remember complaining on a regular basis, like, where are the leaders? Where are the leaders? Where are the leaders? And one day I finally said, well, what are you going to do about it? So I decided to run for office. I ran for a state rep seat who had always been represented by a white male Republican. And I am the exact opposite of those three things. And people at first, so I went out and started knocking on doors 2 years before Election Day. People were like, what the heck what are you talking about? Many of my friends and family basically thought I was insane and didn't support me, quite frankly. They did not want me to run. They thought that I was going to lose. And I just ignored them and kept knocking and kept walking. Um, and on election night, I won by 8 points. I then 2 years later, I did not want to leave the House. I loved being a state representative. But at that point, our Republican senator. And at that point, so the state rep map was kind of like a moderate district, like 50-50 kind of. But once you expanded that to the state Senate map, the state Senate map was fully red, deep, deep red. So basically, if I had no reason to run for state rep, I sure as heck had no reason, no business to run for state Senate. But the person who was going to be running for that seat was just a terrible person. The things that she believed in, the things that she was on record, that she was, the reasons that she was running, I just was like, I can't stand by and watch someone run for the seat in this way. So I'm going to run. And it was that I decided to run. Then COVID hit. It was the worst campaign of my life. If you like, when people talk about hard elections, if you've never run during COVID, don't talk to me. Like you literally don't know what a hard election is if you did not run during COVID. So yeah, ran during COVID, and election night went to bed crying because it was like the results were so neck and neck. 3 days later, my opponent called to congratulate me. I won by less than 2 points, so it was like by a hair that I won. Later, just to say, later on, when I went back to look precinct by precinct of the entire Senate district, the reason that I won was because the people that are in my community, the small town in DuPage County called West Chicago, this small town, the people went out and everyone voted. And that's the community where I was raised. And that's the community where I was a school social worker for 10 years. That's the community that I ended up being on the school board after I left the district to go work for somewhere else. That this community of families and this community of teachers and educators, they're the ones who got me where I'm at. And so when I find something that's unjust, just like I did with my families and my students back then, I'm doing the same thing now. Like I am relentless. I will keep going. I will not stop. It's just something in me. When I see something that's unjust, I just keep going.
Wow. I would say we're like-minded, but I think you are next level because you are getting in the political ring, and that is a whole nother level of advocacy. So anyone listening, I think you probably have the same confidence level that I have, and I'm going to speak for Scott, in that you are going to get this 403B reform done. I refuse to believe that you are going to stop.
I'm not going to stop it. I'm not going to settle. And that's the thing, like during this whole process, for those of you who haven't been following, we filed 6 amendments, okay? 6 amendments to this bill. And it was in attempts, well, the first bill language that we filed was just erroneously filed, first of all. But that's a different story. But the other amendments that went through were because we kept trying to negotiate with the opposition. We kept trying to meet them halfway. That's something that I actually hate about this job, is having to negotiate a bill, but that's what you have to do to get things done. So I'm willing to negotiate a bill, but what I'm not willing to do is negotiate a bill so much that it now has zero impact on the families or the people that we're attempting to impact. And right now in the state of Illinois, we have something called Tier 2. There's different tiers for teachers as they come in. I was blessed to be a Tier 1 teacher. So my retirement pension is going to be much better than those in Tier 2. So imagine being a new teacher, Tier 2, and you're investing in these products. I can't, in good faith, I would not be able to sleep at night if I negotiated this bill down to continuing status quo, which is basically what opposition wanted me to do. They wanted me to continue status quo, or make the environment worse for new teachers. I would not be okay with that.
Nor should you. Wow. Well, I'm going to hand it over to Scott, but before I do, I just want to mention that you represent District 25, which includes parts of Chicago and Aurora. Is that correct?
West Chicago, DuPage County. So I'm about an hour west of the city of Chicago. So I represent Kane, DuPage County, and a bit of suburban Cook counties.
All right, Scott, over to you.
I gotta hit that unmute button. Well, first of all, before we get into questions, I just want to say this was a very intense 3 or 4 months, but it was so much fun working with you, Senator, and your staff. Dan and I really enjoyed working with everyone on your staff, and the passion that they all had for this bill was in many ways sort of I don't know what the right word is, but it helped me be less cynical than I think I am sometimes. Being in the 403 world can be a little cynical, but you guys gave us hope, and so that was fun. And so again, it was fun working with you and your staff. So I want to thank you for that in advance. I know we don't have a lot of time here, so I'm going to try to find the questions. I mean, I've got like 2 hours worth of questions, so I'm just going to try to find the ones that will represent what we had talked about. One of the things that drove me nuts, but also was kind of fun, was the fact that there were so many people that would come on either a private Zoom call that we would have, or in front of the Labor Committee, they would flat out lie about the 403B and about the discussions of this bill. For some reason, this still surprises me, but the fact that they're just willing to flat out say things that are completely untrue, both behind closed doors and in front of the world, does this surprise you?
It absolutely surprised me. I absolutely was not prepared for that. I think like there were moments in committee, I can usually like keep my cool. Even in committee, like I've learned to just like kind of answer the question directly. And, I've honed my craft, I guess. But I was like incapable of like the jaw drop moments during committee when they would just blatantly sit there and read a statement that was fully false. I'm like, at the very last minute on that last day, remember it was 2 days before the end, they put out those talking points.
Oh God, I got them right here.
False,
yeah.
And we had to put out the like counter to that, where it basically completely detailed step by step how they were completely wrong. And they were using big words to try to scare people. I just couldn't believe it. I really couldn't. I had never I've experienced a lot of tactics in Springfield, but flat out lying is not something that I had yet encountered. So we encountered it together.
Oh my gosh, it was gaslighting at its best. I mean, they're great at it. I'll give them that. And I think it's because they fully expect nobody. This is such a minute niche area that almost nobody's going to be able to refute these things quick enough. I don't think they realize that. Well, there are people who actually do know, and you reached out to them. One of the lies that kept popping up, and in fact, it made it into this document that was circulating, even though they knew it to be untrue, because we had corrected them on multiple occasions. But one of those lies we heard over and over was that educators are protected by the new NAIC, that's the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, Model Annuity Regulation 275-1. And this was brought up in original testimony before the Labor Committee. It was brought up in every single meeting behind closed doors with industry groups, with associations. They would all cite this, and they pointed it out as some sort of gotcha, and they would gloat about it that, oh, teachers are already protected by this. Are they actually protected by this NAIC rule? Are teachers protected by this rule?
Are you
law?
Are you wanting me to like lose my cool on your podcast, Scott? Like, are you baiting me right now? Like, what is this? Like, what is this question? They're explicitly not protected by this at all.
I mean, they put a link to it in their document as if that would, like, it literally in the law, in this new, it literally
Yes,
exempts
excluding.
403B plans.
Yeah.
And even if it didn't, one of the things that you're supposed to disclose material conflicts of interest, but then it says cash and non-cash compensation are not material conflicts of interest. So they're not protected.
It is so absurd. And like the people who like you said, like the people who would show up on these calls, and like you would expect the calls to be like a few people, and then all of a sudden there's all these people, and it's everyone just throwing out words, and they, like you said, had kept saying, repeating the same lies over and over again, as though. And there were even times that I was so gaslit, like when you guys were not on calls, I was so gaslit that I would just be like, holy cow. And I would send you a quick text message, right? To say, hey, like, I'm right? Like, is it like, wait a second. Like, I started to question my own sanity. Things that I already knew, I started to question.
At that point, they could be like, no, 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, it equals 5. Are you crazy? It equals 5.
Okay, so can we talk about that math for 2 seconds though? Because did you find it absolutely astonishing that they never talked about our fees?
Never. So this is, obscure and deflect was the strategy. Let's never talk about how fees affect educators, and the fact that everything we're asking for is completely reasonable and in fact normal in almost all other retirement plans.
So one of the best moments in this whole process was when we were in the last committee, and one of my colleagues from across the aisle, who never votes yes on any Democratic bill, who never speaks in favor of any Democratic bill, he was like, so if you know, if teachers are, if what you're saying is that teachers are being protected by you all, and there's no reason to compete, why is there so much opposition? Like, where is this opposition coming from? Like, you're talking about all of these different things that are going on in the bill, but where is all this opposition coming from? And everyone kind of stayed silent. I'm like, because I stayed silent because I was like, oh my God, is he going to go in on me? Like, is that what he's about to do? But then he's like, listen, what I need to know is, what are the fees that you all are charging? What are the fees? How much are you charging in annual fees? I want to know. It was like, and I slowly get this little grin on my face. And they're like, and there's all this bustling about, and I'm like, just look straight ahead. Do not look to your sides, because I did not want to start like laughing out, So they're scrambling. Well, can anyone answer? Is there anyone? And it's like a packed house. And finally, they answered the question, and
they didn't answer it honestly either.
They said between 1.5% and 2%, right? 1.5% and 2%.
The NTSA actually said 1.3, which is not true.
Yeah, and so then he said, yeah, so this is who's opposed. This is why you're opposed to the bill. And I just don't know that everyone caught on to what he was doing. I think part of the problem is who said it, because he's typically never in favor of anything that has to do with a Democrat bill. But truthfully, he came up to me on the floor later and he said, if you pass this bill, you're going to save teachers billions of dollars.
Wow. See, and maybe we need to partner with him on the bill.
Oh, I told him I'm going to be calling him this summer. Oh yeah. So just in comparison, so the reason those, Dan had started with those remarks that I was going to use in closing, I just want to, for the listeners that are out there, like clearly explain this. So I hate math, but this math doesn't lie, okay? The General Assembly's deferred compensation plan charges 0.0068% in annual fees. In committee, we heard that these vendors are charging between 1.5 or 1.3% to 2.5% in annual fees. So at the vendor's current rates, teachers who spend 25 years investing in these products can lose 40% of their investment money to fees. 40%, everyone. That's like, for a person who hates math, that number is so appalling that this is what keeps me up at night. This is what keeps me fighting and keeps me going. Because we need to do better for our teachers.
I would just hammer the comparison between the legislator's plan and what teachers have. I would hammer that home. That was so powerful what you just said.
And yeah, I think I'll try to bring this full circle to, what your father said. I won't get into the farce that they continued to use, which was the term trusted advisor. But as you said, you and your father both thought that these people who are selling these products were trusted advisors, meaning that they were fiduciaries at all times and were always required to put your interest ahead of their own. In fact, most Americans believe this to be true when oftentimes it's not. And the industry will flat out tell you that educators will never start 403B plans if it wasn't for these people who sit in your lunchrooms. But it wasn't the person sitting in the lunchroom that caused you to start your 403B plan. It was your dad and your fellow colleague. He just happened to be the person, because it's so confusing to start one, that you had to go through. So they created a system that was incredibly confusing, and then they act like they're the cure. Senator, we're running out of time here. I want to thank you for all that you did on this, and kind of get your final comments on this bill and the future, both your future and the future of 403B in Illinois.
Okay, so final comments. Dan and Scott, I really, truly, from the bottom of my heart, want to thank you for everything that you've done to help educate me, to help prepare me. There's others who've helped get me to this point. My good friend Jack Shadid, who's absolutely amazing. We've spent hours and hours in the past talking about this before we ever proposed a bill. There's been spaces in which I'm in rooms where I'm with men who attempt to mansplain to me this issue. And it's unbelievable, the gaslighting that they've attempted to do with me. And I just truly, from the bottom of my heart, really want to thank you all for never stooping to that level and constantly being on the up and up, and always lifting me up with every conversation that we have. And no matter how many times or ways I ask the question, always the calm response. I just can't thank you enough. And obviously, I have to mention our staff, Sebastian, who put together a document that said that we had spent over 25 hours in meetings on this bill, and those were official meetings. And he was the mastermind behind putting all of those meetings together. And Natalie and Maddie. This is her first big bill, and her and I sat and talked for an hour at the end of all of this. And she was just so thankful that she had learned what she did. And I hope that moving forward, wherever she goes, obviously she's still staying in the General Assembly right now, but in the future years of her career, that she doesn't forget this work that we did together. And for all of those out there listening, this is a bipartisan thing. I know I mentioned Democrats and Republicans. This is not a one-sided issue. This is about our educators deserving more. And you all have a lot of power, a lot of collective power. And I would really hope that you start bringing these up with your collective bargaining units, bringing up these conversations, and reaching out to your legislators, reach out to your state representatives. That's what they're there for. Talk to them about this legislation, ask them why your state isn't doing this. And I think that the more that we build that momentum, the more we're going to actually have our voices heard, and that we're going to make change. So thank you all.
Oh my gosh. We are just in awe of you, and we are so proud to know you and your staff. And Karina, this story is not yet written. Thank you
Let's
so much for
go.
your
Let's
time.
go. We will have a part B to this once we pass the bill. Okay, we will get this done.
We will come to Chicago to celebrate, to Illinois to celebrate with you and your wonderful staff when this happens.
Yes, let's do it.